The merchant vessel Fortune's Dream drifted quietly through the darkness of space, its cargo holds filled with medical supplies and construction materials bound for the new colony on Titan's Hope. Captain James Mitchell sat in his command chair, reviewing the navigation charts on his display. His crew of 47 people worked at their stations, some monitoring engines, others checking cargo manifests, a few simply enjoying their coffee during the quiet part of the journey. "Captain, we've got 3 contacts on sensors," said Lieutenant Thomas Parker from the navigation console. His voice carried a hint of concern. "They're big. Really big." James stood up and walked over to look at the display. 3 massive shapes appeared on the screen, moving toward them with purpose. Within minutes, the alien vessels surrounded the Fortune's Dream like wolves circling prey. Each one was at least 5 times the size of his ship, their hulls covered in strange markings that glowed with a dull purple light. The communication system crackled to life. A harsh, clicking voice filled the bridge. "Human vessel, you have entered consortium-controlled space. You will power down your engines and prepare to pay the passage tax." James frowned. He had studied the star charts carefully before departure. This was neutral space, open to all species under the agreements made when humanity first joined the Galactic Council. Negative alien vessel. This is neutral space. We don't recognize any authority here except international maritime law. These are open shipping lanes. There was a pause. Then the alien voice returned, harder this time. "All species pay the consortium tax. This is how it has been for 300 years. You will comply or you will be destroyed." James felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his voice steady. His father had been a naval officer back on Earth, and he had taught James one simple rule: never surrender your ship to pirates. That's all these aliens were, pirates with fancy titles. We're a civilian merchant vessel carrying humanitarian supplies. We're not paying protection money to anyone. Now back off and let us pass. The communications officer, a young woman named Emma Roberts, looked up at him with wide eyes. "Captain, they're charging weapons." James grabbed the intercom. "All hands, this is the captain. Brace for possible combat. Get to emergency stations now." He turned back to the view screen where the 3 alien ships loomed like dark mountains. "Send a distress signal back to Earth Command. Tell them what's happening here." "Sir, they're jamming our long-range communications," Emma said, her fingers flying across her console. "I can't get a message out." The alien voice came back one last time. "You have 10 seconds to comply, human. Pay the tax or die." 10, 9, 8. James made his decision. He had carried precious cargo across dangerous routes before. He had faced storms and equipment failures and once even a small pirate raid near the outer colonies. But he had never surrendered his ship, and he wasn't about to start now. "All crew abandon ship procedures. Get to the escape pods now." But there was no time. The alien ships opened fire without reaching zero. Brilliant blue energy beams lanced through space and struck the Fortune's Dream from 3 sides at once. The first impact shattered the forward section, killing 15 crew members instantly. The second blast tore through the engine room, vaporizing another 20 people in a flash of superheated metal and radiation. James felt the deck lurch beneath his feet. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Emma fell from her chair as the artificial gravity failed. Thomas tried to reach the escape pod controls, but another blast struck the bridge directly. In less than 30 seconds, the Fortune's Dream was nothing but debris and frozen bodies tumbling through the void. 3 days later, Admiral Rebecca Stone stood in the Naval Command Center deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean. The room buzzed with activity as officers worked at dozens of stations, coordinating Earth's small but growing space fleet. A young ensign approached her with a data pad, his face pale. "Admiral, we've recovered the black box from the Fortune's Dream. You need to see this." Rebecca took the pad and watched the final minutes of James Mitchell's life. She watched him refuse to surrender. Watched him try to save his crew. Watched the alien ships murder 47 innocent people in cold blood. Her jaw tightened. Her hands clenched into fists. "Get me the president," she said quietly. "And someone wake up every naval historian we have. I want Nelson's tactics, Nimitz's strategies, and every lesson humanity learned from 5,000 years of fighting on the water. These aliens just made a terrible mistake." The ensign hesitated. "Admiral, what mistake?" Rebecca looked up at the main screen showing the star map with hundreds of human ships traveling through space, carrying families and dreams and futures to new worlds. "They touched our boats." Analyst Vorn sat in his small office aboard the Galactic Intelligence Station, his 3 eyes focused on the data streaming across his screen. He had been assigned what his supervisor called an easy task: Study the humans and figure out what kind of threat they might pose to the Zakrin Consortium. His supervisor had laughed when giving him the assignment. They just got into space a few decades ago. This should take you an afternoon. That was 3 days ago. Vorn hadn't slept since. He stared at the historical files he had downloaded from Earth's public databases. The humans kept detailed records of everything, and they were happy to share their history with anyone who asked. Vorn wished they hadn't been so generous. The first file showed ancient wooden boats from thousands of years ago. Humans rowed them across vast oceans, fighting each other with spears and arrows. Vorn thought this was primitive and harmless. Then he opened the next file. Humans had built massive wooden warships with dozens of cannons. They formed battle lines and blasted each other to pieces over control of trade routes. Entire empires rose and fell based on who controlled the seas. Vorn watched footage of a battle called Trafalgar, where a human named Nelson defeated a larger fleet through pure tactical brilliance. Nelson died in the battle but became a hero to his people forever. Vorn's hands trembled as he opened more files. The humans never stopped building boats. Never stopped fighting over them. Iron ships replaced wooden ones. Then steel ships with massive guns that could fire shells across 20 kilometers of ocean. Submarines that lurked beneath the waves like sea predators. Aircraft carriers that projected power across entire regions. But it wasn't just the weapons that frightened Vorn. It was the attitude. He found a document called Freedom of the Seas, written by a human named Grotius in the year 1609. The human argued that no nation could control the open ocean. That all ships had the right to travel freely through international waters. This concept became sacred to humans. They fought wars over it. They built their entire system of laws around it. Vorn discovered records of a war called World War II. Human submarines had hunted enemy cargo ships without mercy, trying to starve entire nations. They called it unrestricted warfare. Hundreds of thousands of sailors died in the cold waters of Earth's oceans. The humans never surrendered. Never gave up. They just kept building more ships and fighting harder. He found another record from something called the Battle of the Atlantic. For 6 years, human ships fought for control of shipping lanes. Thousands of vessels were sunk. Tens of thousands of sailors died. But the humans kept sailing. Kept fighting. Because if they didn't control the seas, they would lose everything. Vorn stood up and paced his small office. His species, the Tellurians, had been part of the Galactic Council for 800 years. They were peaceful merchants and scholars. They had never understood why some species were so violent. But now, studying humans, he began to understand something terrifying. Humans weren't violent because they were primitive. They were violent because they had learned to be. 5,000 years of naval warfare had taught them lessons that no other species in the galaxy had learned. How to blockade entire regions. How to hunt enemy ships across vast distances. How to turn every merchant vessel into a weapon of war when necessary. He sat back down and typed an urgent message to Zakrin High Command: do not engage human vessels. Humans have deep cultural attachment to ships that goes beyond normal logic. They have fought wars lasting decades over the principle of free navigation. Recommend immediate diplomatic resolution and return of bodies from destroyed vessel. This species is dangerous when provoked. Vorn hit send and waited. Hours passed. Finally, a response came back from a Zakrin admiral named Grath. Your concerns are noted but dismissed. Humans are primitives with a few dozen ships. We have thousands. They will learn to obey like all the others. Resume your normal duties. Vorn put his head in his hands. He had tried to warn them. 3 days later he heard the news. 3 more human ships had been intercepted on different trade routes. The captains were William Grant, Robert Hayes, and Elizabeth Moore. All 3 had refused to pay the tax. All 3 ships had been destroyed. Vorn watched the human news broadcast from Earth. He saw something that made his blood run cold. The humans weren't scared. They weren't trying to negotiate. They were preparing for war. He watched a human admiral named Rebecca Stone give a speech at a place called Annapolis, where humans trained their naval officers. She stood before thousands of young officers in crisp white uniforms. They've killed our people, she said. They've destroyed our ships. They think we'll surrender because they're bigger and stronger. But they don't understand who we are. The young officers listened with fierce attention. We are the children of Nelson and Nimitz. Of John Paul Jones and E. Sunson. Of every sailor who ever fought for freedom of the seas. Our ancestors crossed oceans in wooden boats and defeated empires. We will cross space in steel ships and teach these aliens a lesson they will never forget. The crowd erupted in cheers. Vorn turned off the broadcast and sent another message to Zakrin Command, marked urgent. War is coming. We cannot win. This message was also ignored. Admiral Rebecca Stone stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, watching the tactical display as 40 human warships moved into position. Each ship represented months of rushed production, with Earth's shipyards working around the clock. They weren't the biggest ships in the galaxy, but they were crewed by people who understood something the aliens didn't: how to control shipping lanes. "All vessels report ready, Admiral," said Commander David Palmer from the communications station. He was young, barely 30, but he had studied naval history at Oxford and understood exactly what they were about to do. Rebecca nodded. "Send the signal. Execute Operation Stranglehold." Across 40 different star systems, human ships appeared simultaneously at key Zakran trade routes. They didn't attack. They simply positioned themselves in carefully calculated formations and waited. Captain Helen Foster commanded the destroyer Relentless at the Orion sector choke point. Her ship and 5 others formed a picket line across the main shipping lane. When the first Zakran cargo vessel approached, she opened a channel. "Zakran vessel, this is Captain Foster of Earth Navy. You are entering a restricted zone. Power down your engines and prepare for inspection." The Zakran captain responded with anger. "You have no authority here, human. Move your primitive ships or be destroyed." Helen smiled coldly. Her great-grandfather had commanded a destroyer in the Pacific during World War II. She had his medal on her desk and his tactics manual memorized. "You have 2 choices. Submit to inspection or turn around. If you try to force your way through, we will stop you." The Zakran vessel tried to push through. Helen's ships formed a wall, matching every maneuver the cargo ship attempted. They didn't fire a shot. They just blocked the path. After 2 hours, the frustrated Zakran captain turned around and left. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out dozens of times. Human ships established blockades at every major Zakran route. Cargo ships sat idle at ports, unable to deliver their goods. Trade stopped. Commerce died. Within a week, the Zakran economy began to collapse. Billions of credits were lost every day. The Zakran military finally responded. Admiral Grath himself led a fleet of 20 warships to break the blockade at the Epsilon sector. He was confident. His ships were bigger, his weapons more powerful. The humans only had 8 destroyers defending that route. Lieutenant Mark Stevens watched the Zakran fleet approach on his sensors. He commanded a small stealth ship called the Shadow, designed using principles from Earth's submarine warfare. His vessel could hide its energy signature and move silently through space. "They're coming in hard and fast," he reported to the fleet commander. "No formation, no discipline. They think they can just bull through." Captain Robert Hayes commanded the human defense. He had studied the Battle of Jutland, Midway, and a dozen other naval engagements. He knew that bigger ships didn't always win. "All vessels execute Plan Delta. Stevens, take your stealth ships and flank them. Everyone else, fall back slowly and draw them in." The human destroyers began retreating as the Zakran warships advanced. Admiral Graff laughed, thinking the humans were running away scared. He ordered his ships to pursue at full speed. That's when Mark Stevens and 3 other stealth ships appeared directly behind the Zakran fleet. They had circled around using silent running, just like submarines used to do in Earth's oceans. They opened fire at point-blank range, targeting engines and weapons systems. The Zakran fleet panicked. Half turned to face the new threat while half continued forward. Their formation fell apart. The human destroyers stopped retreating and turned around, catching the confused aliens in a crossfire. It wasn't even close. The humans used tactics refined over centuries: concentration of force, coordinated targeting, mutual support. Within 20 minutes, 5 Zakran warships were disabled and the rest were fleeing. Admiral Grath couldn't believe it. His superior fleet had been defeated by smaller ships using strange maneuvers he didn't understand. He sent an emergency message to Zakran High Command. "The humans fight like nothing we've ever seen. They don't follow normal combat doctrine. Request reinforcements immediately." But reinforcements couldn't solve the real problem. The blockade continued. More Zakran trade routes were shut down. Food shipments didn't reach colonies. Industrial materials sat in warehouses. The Zakran stock market crashed as investors panicked. Captain Jennifer Clark commanded a converted cargo hauler called the Merchant's Revenge. Her ship used to carry grain and machinery. Now it carried railguns and missile pods welded to its hull. She patrolled a secondary trade route with 5 other converted civilian vessels. "This is just like the Q ships," she said to her first officer, Lieutenant Thomas Wright. Back in World War I, the British took merchant ships and hid weapons on them. They'd pretend to be helpless cargo vessels until enemy submarines got close. then surprise them. A Zakrin raider approached, thinking the merchant's revenge was an easy target. Jennifer let them get close, keeping her weapons powered down. The raider moved in for the kill. Now, Jennifer said calmly. The hidden weapons activated. Railgun rounds tore through the raiders' shields before they even knew what hit them. The Zakrin ship exploded in a ball of fire. "Q ships for the win," Thomas said with a grin. Back on the Indomitable, Rebecca Stone reviewed the daily reports. 40 Zakrin trade routes blocked. 12 enemy warships destroyed or disabled. 0 human ships lost. The blockade was working perfectly. The Galactic Council sent urgent messages asking for negotiations. Other alien species watched in fascination as this new species demonstrated military tactics they had never imagined. Some began studying Earth's history, trying to understand how humans had learned to fight so effectively. Rebecca allowed herself a small smile. The Zakrin had destroyed 4 human ships and killed nearly 200 people. They thought humanity would be easy to intimidate. They were learning otherwise. "Maintain the blockade," she ordered. "Not one Zakrin ship moves until they're ready to talk reparations." The message was clear. Humanity knew how to play this game. They had invented it thousands of years ago on Earth's oceans. Now they were teaching it to the galaxy. And the lesson was just beginning. The Zakrin Empire made its decision in a war council that lasted 3 days. Admiral Grath stood before the High Command, his pride wounded by the continued blockades and the embarrassing defeats in space. "We cannot defeat their fleet directly," he admitted. "They fight using tactics we do not understand. But their colonies are vulnerable. We strike at their worlds and they will be forced to withdraw their ships to defend them." The High Command agreed. If humanity wanted war, they would get war. The attack came without warning. Zakrin warships appeared above New Perth, a farming colony with 8,000 people. The orbital defense platforms were destroyed in minutes. Then the bombardment began. Farms burned. The main settlement took direct hits. 300 civilians died in the first hour. On Earth, President Thomas Blake received the news with a cold fury. He called an emergency meeting in the Situation Room deep beneath Washington. Admiral Rebecca Stone was there, along with the heads of every military branch. "They've crossed a line," Thomas said quietly. "They think attacking civilians will make us back down. They don't understand humans at all." Rebecca stood up and walked to the large display showing the positions of all human vessels. "Mr. President, I'm requesting authorization to implement Protocol Omega. Total war. Every vessel becomes a warship. Every resource goes to the fleet. We stop playing defense and take the fight to them." Thomas looked around the room at the grim faces of his advisors. "You understand what you're asking? We'll be turning our entire civilian space fleet into a military force." "Yes, sir," Rebecca replied. "It's what we did in 1941 when Pearl Harbor was attacked. It's what we did in 1776 when we fought for independence. When someone attacks our people, we don't surrender. We multiply." The president signed the authorization. Within 48 hours, everything changed. Captain Jennifer Clark received new orders aboard her cargo hauler merchant's Revenge. Her ship was being fully converted into a warship. Engineers swarmed aboard, installing military-grade weapons, armor plating and targeting systems. "How long?" she asked the chief engineer, a tough woman named Ann Cooper. 3 days to make her combat ready," Ann replied. "She won't be pretty, but she'll pack a punch that'll make those aliens think twice." Across human space, the same transformation happened on hundreds of ships. Dr. Peter Wright commanded a science vessel called Discovery that had been surveying asteroid fields. Now his ship was being fitted with mine-laying equipment. His crew of scientists became a military unit overnight. "I studied physics, not warfare," Peter said to his first officer, Lieutenant James Morrison. James grinned. "My grandfather was a submariner. He told me stories about laying mines in the Pacific. Same principle document. We plant our surprises in the shipping lanes and wait for the enemy to stumble into them." Even civilian passenger ships joined the effort. Captain Thomas Anderson had been running luxury tours to the Mars colonies. His ship Starlight Princess now bristled with missile pods and carried a crew trained for combat. The Zakrin expected the human fleet to pull back to defend their colonies. Instead, human ships pushed deeper into Zakrin territory. Captain Richard Hughes led the first boarding action. His ship Defiant closed with a Zakrin supply vessel near their home system. Using magnetic grapples and cutting torches, his team forced their way aboard like pirates from the old sailing days. The Zakrin crew had never experienced hand-to-hand combat in space. They carried energy weapons but had no training in close-quarters battle. Richard's Marines moved through the ship with brutal efficiency, clearing each section in minutes. They captured the vessel intact along with all its cargo and crew. Just like John Paul Jones, Richard said as they secured the prisoners. We don't just sink enemy ships. We take them. Lieutenant Emma Thompson perfected the Q-ship tactic. Her vessel Innocent Trader looked like a damaged cargo hauler limping through space. Zakran raiders saw it as easy prey and moved in close. Too close. The fake hull plating fell away, revealing heavy weapons. Emma's crew opened fire before the raiders could react. Another enemy ship added to the growing list of Zakran losses. But the most devastating change came from Admiral George Carter. He was 60 years old, a historian who had studied unrestricted submarine warfare from World War I and II. He proposed something that made even other human commanders uncomfortable. We hunt everything, George said in the planning meeting. Every Zakran ship, military or civilian, is a target. We cut off their supplies, their communications, their hope. We make them afraid to leave port. Rebecca hesitated. That's extreme, George. Civilian vessels? They bombed our farming colony, ma'am. Killed 300 civilians. Now it's total war. We hunt their cargo ships, their passenger liners, their supply vessels. Everything. We did it in the Atlantic for 6 years. We can do it again. The order went out. Human ships began attacking Zakran vessels throughout their territory. Cargo haulers carrying food disappeared. Fuel tankers were destroyed. Passenger ships were captured and their crews taken prisoner. The Zakran economy didn't just slow down, it stopped completely. Insurance companies refused to cover Zakran vessels. Civilian captains refused to fly. Trade with other species dried up as nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire. Within 3 months, human forces controlled 40% of former Zakran space. Not through conquest but through blockades, raids, and relentless pressure. The Zakran military couldn't be everywhere at once, and the humans struck wherever they were weakest. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Rebecca reviewed the casualty reports. Human losses were remarkably light, only 15 ships lost, mostly to accidents rather than combat. Zakran losses numbered in the hundreds. They still don't understand, Commander David Palmer said, looking at the tactical display. They keep trying to fight us like we're a normal military. But we're not fighting a normal war. Rebecca nodded. We're fighting a naval war. Command the seas, command the world. Command space, command the future. Our ancestors learned these lessons the hard way. Now we're teaching them to the galaxy. A message arrived from the Galactic Council, marked urgent. They were requesting both sides attend peace negotiations. Rebecca smiled. Send a reply. Tell them we'll negotiate when the Zakran are ready to accept our terms. Not before. The war continued. And the Zakran were learning a terrible truth. You could fight humanity over many things. But their ships? Their boats that carried their dreams to the stars? That was a fight you couldn't win. The conference station orbited a neutral moon called New Jutland, named by the humans after an ancient naval battle from their history. The massive circular structure housed representatives from 70 different species, all gathered to witness what many called the most important peace treaty in galactic history. Admiral Rebecca Stone walked through the gleaming corridors with Commander David Palmer at her side. She wore her full-dress uniform, dark blue with gold trim, medals earned over 30 years of service displayed on her chest. Other species delegates stopped to stare as she passed. The human who had brought the mighty Zakran Empire to its knees. Nervous, Admiral? David asked quietly. Rebecca smiled slightly. I've faced worse than a room full of diplomats. At least here, nobody's shooting at us. The conference chamber was enormous, with seating arranged in a circle so that no species appeared more important than another. The Zakran delegation sat on one side, looking diminished and defeated. Admiral Grath was there, his military decorations seeming hollow now. Next to him sat economic ministers and political leaders, all wearing expressions of resignation. The Galactic Council mediator, an elderly being named Vorn, called the session to order. Rebecca recognized him. He was the intelligence analyst who had tried to warn the Zakran about humanity. He caught her eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of respect. We gather here to end a conflict that has destabilized our region of space, Vorn began. The Zakran Consortium has requested terms for peace. Admiral Stone, please present humanity's demands. Rebecca stood and walked to the center of the chamber. She carried no notes, no data pad. She had memorized everything she wanted to say. 6 months ago, the Zakran Consortium destroyed the merchant vessel Fortune's Dream, killing 47 innocent people. Their crime? Refusing to pay an illegal tax in neutral space. The Zakrin then destroyed 3 more human ships when we protested. They thought we would submit. They were wrong. She turned slowly, looking at representatives from dozens of species. Humanity's demands are simple. First, freedom of navigation in all neutral space. No species may tax, detain, or restrict passage of vessels from other species in international zones. This becomes galactic law, enforced by all council members. Murmurs ran through the chamber. Several species nodded in agreement. The Zakrin delegation sat silently, knowing they had no choice but to accept. Second, full reparations for all destroyed vessels and compensation for families of the deceased. The Zakrin will pay 5 billion credits to Earth within 1 standard year. Admiral Grath's face darkened, but he said nothing. His empire's economy was in ruins. 5 billion was painful but manageable. Third, the Zakrin military will withdraw from all occupied trade routes and reduce their fleet size by 40%. Independent observers will monitor compliance. Now the Zakrin delegates whispered urgently among themselves. This was a humiliation, a reduction of their power that would take decades to recover from. Finally, Rebecca continued, the Zakrin Empire will issue a formal apology to humanity and acknowledge that their actions constituted an act of war and a crime against peaceful commerce. Vorn looked at the Zakrin delegation. Do you accept these terms? The head of the Zakrin Council, an old warrior named Thrak, stood slowly. He looked at Rebecca with something between hatred and grudging respect. We accept. We underestimated your species. We will not make that mistake again. The treaty was signed within the hour. As delegates filed out of the chamber, Vorn approached Rebecca. Admiral Stone, may I ask you a question? Of course, Rebecca replied. I studied your species for months before this war. I tried to warn my employers about your naval traditions, your history of fighting over ships and shipping lanes. But I still don't fully understand. Why did your species fight so hard over what other species would consider simple property? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain. Analyst Vorn, do you know how humans spread across Earth? Not by walking. By sailing. We built boats and crossed oceans we didn't understand, sailed to lands we'd never seen. For 10,000 years, boats carried our families to new homes. Our goods to new markets. Our dreams to new horizons. She gestured toward the window where stars glittered in the darkness. Now we build ships instead of boats and we sail space instead of oceans. But the principle is the same. Our vessels carry everything we are and everything we hope to become. They're not just metal and engines. They're our future. Vorn nodded slowly. The Zakrin saw machines. You saw something sacred. Exactly, Rebecca said. They destroyed our ships thinking it was just a tactical move. They didn't understand they were attacking our soul. Every human knows the stories. The Mayflower that carried pilgrims to a new world. The warships that fought for our freedom. The submarines that hunted in darkness. The carriers that projected power across oceans. Now the starships that carry us to new worlds. She looked directly at Vorn. 5,000 years ago, a human admiral named Themistocles said, "The wooden wall is the only defense." He meant ships. He was right then and it's still true now. You can take our land, our cities, our resources. But touch our boats? Our ships. That's where we draw the line. David Palmer joined them. Admiral, the shuttle is ready to take us back to the Indomitable. Rebecca nodded and turned to leave. Vorn called after her. Admiral, one more thing. What will humanity do now? You've defeated the Zakrin. You've changed galactic law. What comes next? Rebecca smiled. What we've always done, Analyst Vorn. We'll build more ships. We'll sail to new places. We'll explore and trade and carry our dreams across the stars. And if anyone tries to stop us. She paused. Well, they can ask the Zakrin how that worked out. As Rebecca left the station, the treaty was being transmitted across the galaxy. Within hours, every species had received the same message. Freedom of navigation was now universal law. The right to sail through space without interference was protected by the full weight of the Galactic Council. But more importantly, every species learned the most important lesson from the war. Humanity was patient. Humanity was reasonable. Humanity would negotiate and compromise on almost anything. But their ships? Their boats? The vessels that carried them across oceans of water and oceans of stars? Touch those and you would face 5,000 years of accumulated fury. You would face a species that never surrendered, never forgot, and never stopped fighting when it came to their right to sail free. The galaxy had learned its lesson. In military academies on 100 worlds, the Treaty of New Jutland was studied as a turning point. Cadets learned 3 simple words that summarized everything. Don't mess with our boats. And the galaxy never forgot.